Okay, welcome to the first program of our season. Father Jared Johnson was nice enough, along with Cressy, to get us set up to do this tour. Father Jared Johnson was born and raised in Williston, North Dakota. He was ordained to the priesthood on June 12th, 2013 by Bishop David Kagan at the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit. He served as parochial vicar at the cathedral from 2013 to 2017. He was the interim rector there from December 2017 until July 2018. Father Johnson spent the last 5 years as a full-time chaplain at the St. Mary's Central High School. He began his assignment as pastor of the Church of St. Mary's on July 6, 2018. And he has a border collie named Tobin that I can tell you is a very nice little dog.
That's right.
So welcome, Father Jared.
Thank you. Thanks, Ann. Thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. As Ann mentioned, my name is Father Johnson, and you might be wondering, how is it possible that a Catholic priest wearing Roman collar has the last name of Johnson, right? And so three of my grandparents, both my dad's parents and my mom's father were all Norwegian Lutherans, but my mom's mom was a Bohemian Catholic from New Radek, down by Dickinson, and so that's the faith that I guess stuck. My mother's side, New Radek. There you go. We have a Bohemian back there, huh?
No, I lived in Dickinson.
There you go. So that's the area in which I'm from. Or where my roots are, and been here since July, and been a priest for 5 years, as Ann mentioned. Spent 5 years at the cathedral as the associate pastor there, and then also teaching at St. Mary's High School here in town, and chaplain there. So I just began here July 6th, and it's a great parish to be at. I'm really thankful that I had the opportunity to present to you, because it forced me to really learn the history of this parish as I begin my assignment here. And so oftentimes you really learn about something by having to teach it, and so I'm grateful for this opportunity. Before I get into some of the specific history, not only of the stained glass windows, but also this parish, I thought it'd be helpful just to offer a word of thanks to all of you for being part of the Bismarck Historical Society. You know, that history is such an important part of who we are. I have a good friend of mine that teaches history, and he oftentimes says, if you don't know your history, you're a darn fool. And I was going to use a different word, but we're in church. But you know what word I would have said. And it's really true. If you don't know your history, you have a hard time knowing who you yourself are, but also of kind of where we're going in the future. And I think such an essential part of being a good citizen, being an American, being a Catholic for us is about knowing our past so we can kind of know what direction we're headed. And so I just want to thank all of you for your vested interest in history and for your involvement in the society. It's wonderful. And I myself love history. And these are just some of the texts I used to put together my talk this evening. And just to prove to you that I have sources, but I'm a little nervous, honestly, as a lover of history, presenting to other lovers of history, because some of the stuff I might say, you might find out isn't actually true, and you can verify that by your own knowledge. And so I'm a little nervous and presenting to some historians in all of you this evening, but it's great for you to be here, so thank you for coming. I thought it'd be helpful to begin by asking, for any of you, is this your first time here to St. Mary's Catholic Church? Anyone, any first-time visitors? A few of you. Okay, well, welcome. Good to have you. And as I mentioned, I'm also a newcomer as well. And so it's good that we can kind of learn together. As we go, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And if you want to hold your questions at the end, we can do that too and do some Q&A. But if something comes to your mind as I'm speaking, feel free to ask. And if I'm going to mention it later, I might just mention that I'll get to that as we go.
Can you use your teaching voice?
Louder? I can speak louder. Yeah. I mean, I'm used to this place being filled with Catholics where they all sit in back and you're all sitting towards the front, so I'm a little surprised by that.
I made them.
That's good. You did well, Ann. Well done. St. Mary's Parish was first built in 1875. Not this building, but the parish was founded or established in 1875. It's the oldest Catholic parish in the Diocese of Bismarck, so in the western North Dakota. Actually, just last week, up in Pembina, which is the first establishment in North Dakota, Bishop Kagan went up there, and they had the 200th anniversary of the parish in Pembina. So that parish was founded in 1818, hard to believe. But the first one here in the Diocese of Bismarck, the western half of the state, founded in 1875. And that church was first built over on Main Street, Main Avenue, and Mandan, on the corner of Main and Mandan, built in 1875. And they took wood that was destroyed in a church in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, put it on the train, and sent it out west, where they built the first Catholic parish in the Diocese of Bismarck. The Diocese of Bismarck was not yet established yet. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But is the first parish here in the city of Bismarck in this region. It is also the first kind of non-Indian mission church. A lot of the early churches here in North Dakota were built as missions to the Native Americans, and so this was kind of the first non-mission church to the Native American people that was built here as the settlers, in fact, established and settled the city of Bismarck. The church, when it was first founded in 1875, was known as the Church of the Immaculate Conception. And you'll see the transition to St. Mary's here in a little while. You probably recognize the connection already. Immaculate Conception is one of the four dogmas that Catholics hold about Mary, that she is immaculately conceived. She was conceived without original sin in preparation for the great task she would have in being the mother of Jesus, the mother of God. And so that was actually defined in an official church teaching way in the 1850s, and so in the 1870s all kinds of churches were being named the Immaculate Conception because it was this newly defined Catholic teaching. So Immaculate Conception. So that's 1875. Fast forward 2 years to 1877, Father Chrysostom Fafa, who was a Benedictine priest, so I'm a diocesan priest, I don't belong to a religious order, but he was a Benedictine. He became the first resident pastor of that parish over on Main Street, and that's the official establishment date of the parish of 1877. So here in 2027, we'll be having our 150th anniversary as a parish, the founding, because they don't consider the official date of establishment until we received our first resident pastor in Father Fafa way back in 1877.
This is Mandan.
What, that was here, no, Mandan Street in Maine. So right kind of where Agers, what is that, Agers Audio, or that's where it is.
Glad you clarified that.
Yeah, where the Anderson building is. Yep, I'm not sure which corner of the intersection, but right down there.
Okay.
Yep. And then 1878, a group of 4 Benedictine nuns from St. Joseph, Minnesota, got on a train, also headed west, got off the train here, right down a few blocks from here, and they started the first Catholic school right in connection with the parish in 1878. So that was around the time that Bismarck Public Schools also started in an official way. And so from the very beginning of formal education in the city of Bismarck, both Catholic education and public education have kind of grown up together starting in 1878. And that's what we consider to be the beginning date of our Catholic schools here in the city of Bismarck. When it opened, they only expected to have a few boarding students and a few day students. They had 21 boarding students, so that would stay there, that would live there, and they had 80 day students that would come and go throughout the day. So over 100 students, 80, yep. So over 100 students as they began in 1878. And so that's where the masses were held, where weddings were held, where baptisms were held for all the Catholics in the city of Bismarck and the region of Bismarck for about 21 years. And then in 1897, so 21 years later, 1897, construction began on this church here on Broadway Avenue. And so that took about 1 year, and it was officially dedicated in 1898, on September 25th, 1898. So it took just over a year to build this church. So the current building you're sitting in, this church, is 120 years old. It's 120 years old. And we'll talk more about the stained glass windows, but just really amazing how they could build things like this without the technology we have, without the different resources we have now. They almost knew how to build things better back then than we do now. So it's quite amazing to think about. The cost to build this building in 1898 was $12,000. You can't get a lot for $12,000 today, right? So $12,000. I just looked. The current equivalent of that, due to inflation, would be about $325,000. So you couldn't even build this, of course, for $325,000. We're building a new chapel up at the new high school for St. Mary's, and I'm kind of in charge of design, and let me tell you, it's not going to be $325,000. So just amazing to think about. So if you fast forward then to 1910, so when this parish was first built, we were part of the Diocese of Fargo. And so as many of you know, for Catholics, every region is broken up into dioceses, and every diocese has a bishop. It's a pretty simple thing. And in those days, when this church was first built in 1898, the entire state of North Dakota was one diocese, the Diocese of Fargo, and Bishop Shanley was the bishop then, and hence the Catholic high school over in Fargo is Bishop Shanley High School. Originally, the diocesan headquarters for North Dakota was at Jamestown, and then it was a bit kind of too small, and so they moved it to Fargo shortly after establishment, and then Fargo was the seat, if you will, for the diocese here in North Dakota. Then 1910, Pope St. Pius X established a brand new diocese, which was the Diocese of Bismarck, splitting North Dakota into the two dioceses, the Diocese of Fargo in the east, the Diocese of Bismarck in the west. When the Pope establishes a new diocese, he needs to do two things. He needs to name somebody to be the bishop of that diocese, and then that bishop needs to choose a church within the diocese to be the church's cathedral. And so the very first bishop of the Diocese of Bismarck was known as Abbot Vincent Worley. Thank you. I was going to say Bishop Abbot Brian from last year. It was the abbot before, but anyway. Abbot Vincent Worley was the first bishop, and he was the abbot of Richardton over in Richardton at the abbey there. There was fear that when he was named the bishop, because he was a Benedictine, that he was going to move the headquarters over to Richardton away from Bismarck, but he never ended up doing that. They kept it here in Bismarck. And so the newly ordained Bishop Worley chose the only Catholic church in the city of Bismarck to be the first cathedral. And so this was known as, many of you maybe remember it, St. Mary's Pro-Cathedral until 1954. Pro-Cathedral stands for the provisional cathedral, with the intent of eventually building a more permanent cathedral when the funds were raised. So this was known as the Pro-Cathedral from 1910 until 1954. And so this was the bishop's church. He was the pastor of this church for all those years. Cathedral, of course, over on Raymond Street was finished in 1945. And at that time, this was no longer the cathedral. They kept the name Pro-Cathedral, St. Mary's Pro-Cathedral, until 1954, which actually we could still call ourselves a Pro-Cathedral today if we wanted to. It's something that we can maintain and have, but we just simply go by the Church of St. Mary's today. And so that's a little bit about the history. Bishop Worley, when he was named the bishop of this diocese, had a lifelong dream to build a cathedral. And so he had a couple plans drawn up, and he was ready to go in the 1920s. And then all of a sudden, late 1920s, of course, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, a really bad time to start fundraising and building a new church. So he held off on it. And then when he retired in 1939, the new bishop, Bishop Vincent Ryan, he found out that Bishop Worley had been buying some land on the far west side of Bismarck, just buying up property, and Bishop Ryan was happy to know that there would be a new home to the cathedral, so he finished purchasing some of the land around there and then started building in 1941. World War II, of course, kind of delayed the construction of the cathedral, and it was finished in 1945. And so that's when this was no longer the cathedral. Couple notes on some historic pastors here. One is Father John Slagg. This is Father John Slagg. We have a display case out in the gathering space with some information about him. He was a pastor here from 1922 to 1933, so for 11 years. He came over from Holland, and he was a translator during World War I for the Allies, and then after the war, he came over here after ordination and served here in the Diocese of Bismarck. He was named pastor in 1922. He actually was the first superintendent of our grade schools, of St. Mary's Grade School. He's also the president of the Bismarck Park Board, and the parish owned land close to the cemetery that they donated for Hillside Park. And I've been told that our parish still owns a little bit of land in Hillside Park. But Father Slagg did a 100-year lease for $1. Not $1 a year, $1. And that ends here in 2023. We'll see what happens.
Take the pool back.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. I got people checking on it, so. And then Father Slagg, very tragically, went kind of paralyzed in one of his legs, went down to Rochester, went down to Mayo, and had an operation on a brain tumor and died about a week after the operation, one day before his 43rd birthday. And so he was a legend here at St. Mary's Parish and died way too young at the age of 43. And we have in our display case out there a few items of Father Slagg's. This was his chalice. And so we use this still when Bishop Kagan comes, or we'll use it on Christmas and Easter, big occasions. It's a beautiful chalice that we use for Mass. So this belonged to Father Slagg, even has his name on the bottom, Reverend John A. Slagg. So this chalice is well over 100 years old. And then this here was Father Slagg's monstrance. For those of you who don't know, oftentimes we have this practice of Eucharistic adoration, the Catholic belief that Christ is truly present in the Blessed Sacrament. And so for adoration, we put the Blessed Sacrament in here in a time for worship. And oftentimes people say, well, Father, that sounds like idolatry. Well, if the belief is that Christ is truly present in the Eucharist, then that wouldn't be idolatry. That's worship of Christ, who's truly present in the host, in the Eucharist. And so the monstrance is a Latin word which means to show. And so this is a vessel, if you will, that shows the presence of Christ here in the Blessed Sacrament. And so we use this for our time of Eucharistic adoration here. Shortly after Father Slagg passed away in 1933, they had his funeral here. Thousands and thousands of people came. He's buried in St. Mary's Cemetery, which was found in 1878. And then a brand new young whippersnapper was named pastor. He was 33 years old, and his name was Father Robert Fian. 1933, he became the pastor. He died as pastor in 1981. He was a pastor for 48 years. He served through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. He died in the rectory from heart failure at the age of 83 in 1981. And so our school gymnasium is named after Monsignor Fian. So it's amazing to think that from 1922 to 1981, Father Slagg and Monsignor Fian were the two pastors of this parish. Pretty amazing to think about. A little bit about the architecture. I mentioned this was built in 1898. The rectory, which is where the priests used to live up until the early 1990s, was built in 1918. So that building with the white pillars just off the courtyard there is 100 years old. And that was built for the priests to live. They had about 3 to 4 priests live there from 1918 up until the 1990s. And now we live in a house just on the on the east side here of the church. And then in 2003, Father Charlie Height, some of you may of course know him, he was the pastor here that oversaw the construction of the gathering space that then joined the rectory and this church. So that gathering space was added only 15 years ago. And it's a very well done space, I must say. It has great warmth to it, and it's a wonderful place to gather after Mass and for socials and those types of things. So originally, this entire wall, and some of you may remember this, all these windows would have been exterior windows directly outside looking to the east. And even the walls out there were exterior walls on the east side of the church. Until this was added in 2003. A couple notes on the overall architecture here of the church. You'll notice it's in a traditional Latin cross form. So by Latin cross, I simply mean the shape of the cross with the top end a bit shorter than the long end and two equal sides. And so the idea is an aerial view of the church is in the form of a cross. That's intentional with these two little side transepts here and then the longer nave of the church. And so it's a traditional Latin cross. The best way to classify the architecture would be Gothic. For those of you who are architecture savvy, you have Romanesque, you have Baroque, you have Neo-Gothic, but this would probably be Gothic. And you would note that it's Gothic because of the points throughout the church. And so the stained glass windows, even the sides here, all the points and the different lines indicate that it's a Gothic church. It has a very specific intention. It's meant to kind of draw us in and draw us up, right? Representing our relationship with God, so that when you come in the back door, you're meant to be kind of drawn into the mystery of God, drawn into a relationship with God. That's intentional on the part of designers of the church. And this church building itself was renovated in 1994, and so it was a major renovation back in 94. They did a major capital campaign. In fact, they restored all the stained glass windows back in 94 and did a lot of the work. They added the wall back there, and a lot of the painting would have been done in 1994. And so not much has been done since then in terms of renovation and updating outside of the gathering space and adding that. Underneath, I'm going to walk up here for a moment and lift this the altar cloth. No, that's not a treasure chest where we hide all of our money. That's, for those of you who know, it's a reliquary that holds relics. And quite honestly, I think, I'm biased, but I think we have one of the best collection of relics here in North Dakota. Just let me mention a few of the saints who we have actual bones of or different relics of. St. Bartholomew, one of the apostles chosen by Christ. St. Benedict, of course, the founder of the Benedictines, the Benedictines have great influence here of the church in western North Dakota. Pope St. Pius X, who was the Pope who established the Diocese of Bismarck. St. Maria Greti, who was a 20th century martyr. And St. Therese of Lisieux, the Little Flower. Many of you know her story. So we have relics of those saints and many more.
Where are the relics in that?
They're right in there, yep. So they're in that chest, and we have keys, and once in a while we'll open it up and let people see them.
Bones.
Yeah, small bone fragments, yeah. And oftentimes, they're very well documented with different, as history people, you'd want to know this, with different verifications and those types of things. And just one note, I know sometimes, depending on your familiarity with the Catholic faith, one note on relics, sometimes I'm asked as a priest or as a Catholic, why do you worship relics? And the easiest question is we don't, right? If you meet anyone who is worshiping relics, that would be idolatry, worshiping a false god. We don't worship relics. The early practice actually came from the time of the Christian persecution in the Roman Empire, when oftentimes they had to have Mass in secret in the catacombs, and they would have Mass at the tombs of loved ones where their remains were. And so it was a long-standing practice then to celebrate Mass with bones either in the altar or close to the altar as a kind of remembrance of the early Christians celebrating Mass in the catacombs close to the tombs of their loved ones. And what I oftentimes told my high school students at St. Mary's was relics are meant to be a reminder to the life of holiness that a Christian's called to. They're meant to be a reminder of the life of St. Maria Goretti or Teresa Lisieux, of being reminded to imitate their holiness and their virtue and those types of things. And as human beings, we love reminders. I trust that in your home, you have pictures of loved ones, and you have American flags, and you have other things that remind you of those things you love. And so for Catholics, relics are simply reminders of those different people in the life of holiness that we're called to. So those are just some of the highlights of the features of the church, not getting into yet the stained glass windows. Any questions for me before we move on to the stained glass windows?
Is that an original altar? The one behind?
That altar is not original, no. If you've seen the picture in the gathering space right close to the bathrooms, and if I talk long enough, you'll have to go use the bathroom. But there's a picture from 1951 that gives you a good look at what the church originally looked like up until the 1970s, when they did some work. In the 1990s, they did some more work. And the original church actually had side altars right where this rectangular maroon thing is. And here they had two side altars, and then they had a main altar, a high altar, with the beautiful spires and very elaborate marble altar. So the white one behind is actually part of the original altar, but they knocked off all the spires and all the pillars, and they just have the tabernacle and then the altar. But the wood one was built in 1994 when the church was most recently renovated. No, there was no windows there. There were statues. I think one of the Sacred Heart, which is back in our original entrance, and one of Mary, which is now over here in a little alcove for devotion.
How much did the renovation in 1994 cost?
You know what? I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look at our numbers. At our records, yeah. What was the cost of the renovation in 1994? Do we have any parishioners here? You might remember there's a major capital campaign. I don't know what the total cost would have been.
Do all churches have relics under their altar?
So most churches either have relics under the altar or in the altar. So most of them do. So Cathedral I know does, and so like I said, is a long-standing tradition. Sometimes it gets lost in history, I guess, as to which saints are there. At the altar at the high school, I've been asking every priest I know who's in the altar, and nobody knows. So, but we have good documentation as to whose relics we have.
And they would have been behind that one in the back, right?
Yep, and you know what? I would have to look and see if it was originally in the altar. Typically, they're put when the priest at the beginning of Mass, when he kisses the altar, they're usually put in that location in a lot of altars in a small little case.
The cathedral, they're in the altar.
They're in, yeah. Yep.
Remember what relics are in there?
Oh, I knew somebody was going to ask.
I think I took a couple.
I think Saint Benedict is also there. Saint Justin Martyr, a 2nd century martyr. Saint Cecilia. And then there's two more that I can't recall. Yeah.
We were told as altar boys,
That-
part of our training was to memorize
Who's in there? Yeah. Yeah, they don't even make priests learn that now, huh? It's a new day.
Did you be an altar boy, Mike?
Yes, I was. My knees are shot because of it. That's a
Of
cathedral
all that
stair.
up there, what is the altar? Is it the white thing?
Okay, so we have two altars. Good question. So the white altar is the original high altar. Okay? This altar is now called the main altar. So they're both, to answer your question, yes, they're both altars. Now, I wasn't alive before 1967, but some of you may have been. And prior to 1967, the Mass was celebrated ad orientem, meaning away from the people. And so the priest would celebrate Mass facing that way with his back to the people and only turn during certain parts of the dialogue of the Mass. And so he would celebrate Mass facing that way with the altar in front of him. And then with the reforms of the Second Vatican Council in 1967, they moved the altar away and the priest now ordinarily faces the people.
Is the white one old? Is that the original?
That's original. Yeah, it is. From the church was built.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
At the same time, the altar rails went away too.
I'd have to look, yeah, if you look at the picture, and I can show it to you as you leave, you can see the altar rails. And actually, I don't know if you can see it from here. Oh, yeah, right. So if you look straight out, if you're in this pew, see above the pew there, the metal rails? That's the original communion rail that was in front of the sanctuary. So you'd come up, kneel, the priest would come by with Holy Communion. Sorry, I got close to the video there.
We can edit.
Okay, good. You're going to have to do a lot of editing. Like when I forgot the name of the first bishop, my goodness. Great. Any other questions about the church? This is our main podium. The technical term is the ambo, where the readings are proclaimed from, the Gospels proclaimed from. Most priests preach from the ambo. The one over here is for our musicians. And we also have an original organ, actually not original, but built in 1927, that's up in the choir loft. You can see the mirror where the organist would be able to sit, play the organ, and see the priest for the various parts of the Mass. And so that was donated by the St. Mary's grade school students. I don't know how grade school students have money, but it was donated by them in 1927 for the 50th anniversary of this parish, or of this building. And it still works today. They have pipes up on the left and the right. If there's closets up there where the original pipes are, and it sounds perfect. And it's almost 100 years old.
What time are your services on Sunday?
9 and 11.
9 and 11?
Yep.
Which is more crowded? 11?
The 11 would have more kids. Yeah, a little more crowded.
I mean adults.
Adults? The 11 is a bit more full, I would say. Yeah.
Might come.
Yeah, come.
I don't see the confessionals.
Okay, good.
Are they still?
Our confessional is way back in the corner. There you'll see a little nameplate next to it with my name on it, and the red light above is for when somebody's obviously confessing their sins. The original confessionals, the one was over where Mary is now, and then the other one was just symmetrical on the other side. And when they added the ramp to get up to the sacristy for handicap accessibility, they took away the confessional over there. And then the original door, of course, was way back there by the Sacred Heart statue that went out on Broadway, and then the steps went down. And with the 2003 edition of the gathering space, they put a stained glass window in there and closed off that entrance.
Father, is there only one confessional?
We only have one confessional here.
My, you must have long lives.
You know? Yeah, right. You know, I was as Ann mentioned, I was at Cathedral for 5 years, and we had 2 confessionals. And I was really amazed how many people went to confession there. We have confession every single morning there from 7:15 until 8 a.m. And my 5 years there's always somebody in line. Maybe that's because I gave light penances, I'm not sure. But even on Saturday nights, before Mass at 4, and then Saturday evenings, we'd always have 2 priests. And you know, sometimes if you're not familiar with it, you think it's something really of the past that people don't do anymore. But I'm amazed how many young Catholics, and not just young Catholics, but Catholics of all ages, still go to the sacrament of confession, which is an encouraging thing for me as a priest.
Where, if you have 2 priests, where does this?
So only one at a time would hear confession. So we rotate.
Non-Catholics confession too?
So typically, non-Catholics don't go to confession. I've had it before where somebody will come in and maybe they have some questions or they want to visit about something, and more of a counseling or advice type conversation. Okay, very good. Well, the real thing you came here for was the stained glass windows. I know that was mentioned on your brochure. And once again, I'm a bit biased, but I think you'd be hard-pressed in the state of North Dakota to find more beautiful stained glass windows in a Catholic church. St. Joe's in Mandan, if any of you go there, they'll give us a run for our money a little bit, but they're really beautiful, beautiful windows that have been preserved, and they're great. The only disadvantage of adding this gathering space is you really lose the natural light shining on these eastern windows, because if you just look from the east and then you look at the brilliance of the western window with the light coming in, it's hard to beat that. So that was a loss, but I guess it was worth the loss.
There has to be some kind of underlighting.
Yeah, we have some lighting up top, but it just doesn't do it the justice it needs. So, depending on how much you know about stained glass windows, the overall concept is quite simple. Oftentimes in the Middle Ages and beyond, a lot of people just couldn't read, and they were illiterate or they didn't read. And the stained glass windows were designed to be able to inspire, to tell a story. And so every stained glass window is trying to tell a story about a saint, about a life event from the life of a saint or Christ or whatever it may be. So to almost see every stained glass window, at least here, as telling a story is the best way to kind of read stained glass windows. And the original designers of this church did a wonderful job in being very intentional about even the placement of some of the windows. And so you'll notice this window here is of the Nativity, the birth of our Lord, and you see him there in the center with Mary and Joseph and the wise men from the east and shepherds and all those things. But you'll notice that it's on what side of the church? The east side, the side the sun rises, the side in which morning breaks. And so if you had never been here before, if I were to ask you to guess what's going to be on that side, what are you going to guess? The crucifixion, right? And so the sun sets in the west, the day ends in the west, Christ's life, at least on earth, ended through his death on the cross. And so east and west, rising and setting. And they're just really gorgeous windows. You'll notice in this one, just to Christ's left, to our right, Mary being held. Mary is traditionally held in blue, or garbed in blue, color of Our Lady. And you'll also notice both Mary and the person on her right and her left, what do they have behind them? Behind their head. See those halos? So in sacred art, stained glass windows in sacred art, at the time of making the piece or the window, if the person has been canonized a saint, you put a halo there indicating they've been canonized officially as a saint. And so more than likely, with me doing no research on it, I know that to Mary's right, to our left, is St. John the Apostle, who's typically depicted without a beard. He was the youngest apostle. He was the only apostle that didn't flee from the crucifixion. And then to Mary's left, to our right, is probably more than likely Mary Magdalene. And I guess there's two women on those sides. So I don't even know exactly who those would be. But they would be saints.
Got his arms around the legs.
What's that, Ann?
You know who it is that's got their arms around the legs at the bottom?
You know, I don't know. I don't know.
That's quite moving.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
There's a soldier there.
Yeah, the Roman soldier with the with the lance. I don't know if any of you know Father Al Bitts from the Diocese of Fargo. He lives here now in Bismarck. His real name is Longinus, which is the name given to the Roman soldier at the crucifixion, but he goes by Al. So I thought of him when I think of the Romans.
Name?
Father Al Bitts, Longinus. Yeah. So there you go. Yes.
Yes. What I often think of it, these windows are facing west. You have hailstorms and people throwing a rock or something. What kind of protection?
Good insurance. No. No, I mean, on the outside, there's a layer of outer glass, or almost like a plexiglass, to help protect from hail and those types of things. But, I mean, if somebody wanted to, they could really do a lot of damage.
Like they say, they're irreplaceable.
They're irreplaceable. They'd be hard to replace. Yeah.
How long have these windows been here?
These windows have been here pretty much from the construction of the church. I could not find the original year, but I'll tell you this, I'll be honest. Built in 1898. In 1910, when Bishop Worley arrived as the new bishop, I was looking at pictures from that, and you can see the windows in 1910. So, no earlier, of course, than 1898, but no later than 1910.
Those two are dark, and then there's that bright one, got some shadow in the
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure if that has to do with some type of coloration in the glass when it was made.
some blockage from the street.
Yeah, there's trees over here, so I'm not sure. I'd have to go outside and get a better look.
Way in the back, the balcony, are those original too?
Yeah, those are original. And I'll mention the Mary window here in a second. That's kind of the cream of the crop window we have. So I just wanted to point out those two of the Nativity, the birth of our Lord, and the crucifixion, Christ's death on the cross. Somebody asked before we began about the Holy Spirit window, and that is also an original window, and it's in the sanctuary for a specific reason. Often, as a lot of you know, for Christians, there's a lot of Jewish history and a lot of Jewish roots. And in the temple in Jerusalem, where the Holy of Holies was, they had all kinds of symbolism that this was where the presence of God dwelt. And the Holy Spirit is a reminder that our belief as Catholics that Christ is truly present in the Eucharist. And so this kind of symbol of this overshadowing of the presence of God where God dwells. And so that's why they put the Holy Spirit window there. Sometimes in churches, if they have a dome above the altar, they'll paint the Holy Spirit above, recognizing that something holy happens in this space. This is a holy space.
Is this stained glass from America or from Europe?
It's from Europe.
It is from Europe.
Europe. I believe Germany.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite gorgeous. And I'm not going to go through each of the side windows. If you have not grabbed one already, some of you did, we have a small brochure that has just kind of a picture of most of the windows and a little bit about each of the individuals depicted in the window. So at least you can recognize who the saint is. It's not going to do a lot of good to go back there, but I'll just mention here we have the Immaculate Heart of Mary depicted. The Immaculate Heart there in the center with the sword piercing her heart. That goes back to the Gospel of Luke, in which the temple priest Simeon, when Mary brought Jesus to the temple, he made this prophecy that a sword would pierce her heart. And a long-standing Catholic tradition relating the sword piercing Christ's heart, and also Mary's in her own suffering in losing her son. And so the Immaculate Heart there is depicted with a sword going through her heart. And over here, and I can't understand fully why she's here, but that's St. Catherine of Alexandria. And so there's a little bit about her. She's the patroness of wheelwrights and philosophers. So you'll see the wheel there depicted in the window. And so she's here. I'm not quite sure why she's a saint, she's in heaven. I'm not quite sure why she has such a prominent location here. You'd think maybe they would have put St. Joseph right across from Mary, but we'll find that out in heaven. There you go. Maybe that's the reason. Oh, right there. And then also, that's a good point. I just caught it.
Do you have any information on the people other than the Marquis who donated money to these windows?
No, I mean, we would have record of everyone. And I mean, it's in the windows. And then also in the renovation in 1994, if you look closely and you walk to each window, there's a small brass plaque with the name of the person that donated in 1994 for the restoration of the windows.
That's what that is, Catherine.
Yeah, so that would have been donated by Catherine McDonald's family in her memory.
What was the question he asked before that you said you just noticed on there?
Oh, I just noticed that maybe the reason Catherine's there is because of the donor.
Oh,
Right, and so maybe they gave a bit more to get it further up. I'm a pastor, I know how those things work. Or at least I'm learning. No, I'm teasing, I tease. Good. And then the hallmark window, many of you know the history of that. It's on the front of the guide here. And that was given by the Marquis de Moraes after her husband's death. Or it was given by Medora after her husband's death. So we have it on here in 1885. The Marquis de Moraes, the founder of Medora, was accused of murdering a cowboy. During his trial, his wife Medora stayed in Bismarck with the Benedictine sisters at St. Alexius Hospital and met the priest who would later build St. Mary's, Father J.B. Gennon. After the Marquis was acquitted, Medora was grateful to the sisters and Father Gennon for their prayers on her husband's behalf. Upon the Marquis' death, Medora purchased this elaborate window in his memory. And so it even says way up in the original glass, Marquis de Moraes at the very bottom. It is beautiful. So that window is the Immaculate Conception, and it's fitting because St. Mary's Church was first known as the Church of the Immaculate Conception, and so to have that window here in the current St. Mary's Church is a great thing. And actually at night, we're trying to do a better job of lighting it up. We had lights installed, or they did it in the 1994 renovation that automatically turn on when it gets dark to light it up from the back. I think we can do it a bit better to get better light shining on it, but it's really beautiful to see. And just how brilliant the blue is, and it's amazing. Yes, sir.
Father, do you have any idea about how the subject matter of each window was chosen? Was that chosen by somebody here, or was that stock windows that were made available?
You know what? That's a great question, and it was whoever the pastor was then, whoever helped design it, would have had a lot of influence on that, and more than likely, he probably worked with donors, and so just this window is a prime example that maybe this donor here wanted to donate this window in memory of Catherine McDonald, and so they wanted St. Catherine depicted. But I'm not entirely sure as to how that selection process happened. Kind of related to that, up at the new high school that's being built, I mentioned being involved with the chapel design. We're having stained glass windows built or made and commissioned for that chapel for the students to go to Mass in each week. And the overall theme we chose for the windows were saints who in their youth had some type of moment of conversion where they kind of committed their life to God. And so the idea was this is a high school with young people. They're the St. Mary's Saints, so we wanted to kind of combine young people and saints. And so what we did is we chose 18 saints, 9 males, 9 females, and we went through and selected some event from their life where they had some type of encounter with God that were then depicting in the lower part of the window. Then the upper part of the window is a more well-recognizable image of that saint. So, for example, St. Teresa of Calcutta. When she was a young lady, her dad would oftentimes go away on business trips. She grew up in Albania. And when he was away on business trips, he'd leave money behind for his wife, Teresa's mother, to take care of people and to take care of her family members, to feed them. And so all growing up, oftentimes she'd be eating supper, and mom and dad would be there, and these other people would be there too. She thought they were aunts and uncles and cousins. They were people off the street. Mother Teresa's parents brought people in off the street and fed them. That formed Teresa of Calcutta. So we're selecting those types of events to depict in the window. So in the window, the scene is Teresa of Calcutta as a 12-year-old girl sitting at a dining room table with mom and dad and all these relatives. And we're going to be able to teach through the windows in a similar way to trying to teach now. So we're really excited about it. The new high school, yep, up on 70, yep, 57th.
It occurs to me that a comparable question to the one I asked about the selection of the subject matter for the windows would be about the design of the window after the subject matter was decided on. Because if you're depicting the crucifixion, for instance, there could be 10,000 different ways to do that.
Yeah,
why this particular set of figures and a particular set of colors?
And so even in my own experience, and I can't speak for that, but a lot of that is twofold. One, artists, and then two, the owner's requests, right? And so in designing the windows up north, you know, the artist has a certain way of doing it, a certain style, a certain vision, but then we as the school also say we want this in there, we want that. And so more than likely it's a conversation between the owner, the pastor, whoever it may be, and the artist that's actually doing the windows. Great. Anything else?
Too bad that these are shaded.
It is too bad, right? Yeah. We'll look into finding a way to light them better, but you can't replace sunlight. I mean, just look how beautiful it is.
Those are very
If
detailed.
these
Very detailed.
damaged, God forbid, there are still firms in Germany that still do this kind of work. I read them somewhere.
Yeah.
So there isn't as if they'd be lost. I mean, just a cell or something fell out, you can still get them.
Yeah, there would be people that would do that, right? Yeah. Because I even know at the cathedral, when I was there a couple of years ago, they redid the protective glass on the outside of the church when they painted it. And for a couple days, the protective glass was off. And I know there was some concern about what if hail comes during those days. And the stained glass artists assured us they took pictures and they said if something like that were to happen, we can remake it. Now, it's not sometimes the same, but yeah. Yeah, anything else? Oh. This has been fun. I've enjoyed this.